The Siege of Leningrad stands as one of history's most harrowing ordeals. For nearly 900 days, starting in September 1941, the city was encircled by German and Finnish forces, aiming to starve it into submission. Millions suffered from cold, hunger, and relentless shelling, yet Leningrad did not fall. The city became a symbol of Soviet resistance. As the tide of war turned, the Germans faced a new reality: escape, not conquest. Operation Nordlicht, Northern Light, was conceived as a secret plan for a strategic German withdrawal. Years of siege had drained both sides, but by late 1943, the Germans were on the defensive everywhere. The Red Army was preparing massive offensives to break the siege for good. The Germans faced a stark choice: hold and risk annihilation, or retreat to a shorter, more defensible line. Operation Nordlicht was their reluctant answer. This story explores why the Germans planned to abandon a city they'd tried so hard to capture. We'll examine the shifting military situation, the strategies of both sides, and the fate of this secret operation. Was Nordlicht a success, a failure, or simply overtaken by events? These are the final, decisive moments of the Siege of Leningrad, a battle for survival and escape. The endgame had begun. By late 1943, Germany's eastern front was crumbling. Defeats at Stalingrad and Kursk had shifted the initiative to the Soviets. The Wehrmacht, once unstoppable, was now stretched thin and losing ground. Army Group North, besieging Leningrad, was exhausted and overextended. Supplying and defending the long front around the city became nearly impossible. The High Command in Berlin began to see the siege as a liability. Field Marshal von Küchler, commanding Army Group North, warned that his forces couldn't withstand a major Soviet attack. He requested permission to withdraw to the Panther Line, a shorter, fortified position. Hitler, obsessed with holding ground, refused for months, but Soviet forces were massing for a massive assault. Intelligence left no doubt an attack was imminent. Reluctantly, Hitler authorized planning for a phased withdrawal, Operation Nordlicht. The plan was a last resort, an admission that the siege could not be maintained. The divisions holding Leningrad would be needed elsewhere. The Germans faced a stark reality: retreat or risk total destruction. Operation Nordlicht was born out of necessity, not choice. The fate of Army Group North now hung in the balance. The clock was ticking. By early 1944, Leningrad's situation had improved dramatically. The road of life across Lake Ladoga was now a reliable supply route. Starvation had eased and the city's factories were producing weapons for its defense. In January 1943, the Red Army's Operation Iskra broke the land blockade, opening a narrow but vital corridor. A railway soon connected Leningrad to the rest of the Soviet Union. The siege's grip was loosening, but the threat remained. Throughout 1943, Soviet forces built up for a decisive blow. They now outnumbered the Germans in men, tanks and artillery by wide margins. German intelligence saw the danger, but their troops were exhausted and morale was low. The Germans dug in, bracing for the inevitable assault. For them, it was a tense wait for the storm to break. The question was no longer if the Soviets would attack, but when and where. The final confrontation was near. The Soviet plan to end the siege was massive and meticulously prepared. The Leningrad-Novgorod offensive aimed not just to relieve the city, but to destroy Army Group North. Two Soviet fronts would attack in a classic pincer movement, encircling and annihilating the German 18th Army. Deception was key. Dummy tanks and fake radio traffic misled the Germans. The Oranienbaum bridgehead became a launch pad for the assault, secretly reinforced under German noses. On January 14, 1944, the offensive began with a devastating artillery barrage. The goal smashed German defenses, shattered their command, and demoralized the troops before the main assault. The Soviets left nothing to chance. On the German side, von Küchler hoped to delay the Soviets long enough to retreat to the Panther Line. Operation Nordlicht called for a phased withdrawal, trading space for time. It was a desperate race. Could the Germans escape before the Soviet pincers closed? The fate of Army Group North would be decided in days. The battle for Leningrad was about to reach its climax. The final battle for Leningrad was a clash of wills, Hitler's rigid fanaticism versus Stalin's ruthless pragmatism. Hitler refused to allow retreat, overruling his generals and demanding the impossible. Field Marshal von Küchler, a seasoned professional, saw the need for withdrawal, but was trapped by Hitler's orders. On the Soviet side, Stalin trusted his front commanders, Govorov and Meretskov, to plan and execute the offensive. Govorov, an artillery expert, and Meretskov, a veteran of the Leningrad front, coordinated the massive assault. Stalin's willingness to delegate gave the Soviets a crucial edge in flexibility and planning. The German command structure, paralyzed by Hitler's interference, could not adapt. This difference in leadership would prove decisive. The fate of Leningrad and Army Group North hung on these choices. Operation Nordlicht was a complex, phased withdrawal plan, crafted in secret by German commanders. The goal: pull the 18th Army back to the Panther Line, avoiding encirclement. The first phase involved thinning the front and preparing rear defenses without alerting the Soviets. Each step was to be executed under strict code names, with a scorched earth policy, destroying anything useful to the enemy. Civilians were forcibly evacuated or deported for forced labor. The plan depended on precise timing and discipline. If the Soviets attacked too soon, disaster loomed. The trigger for withdrawal was the expected Soviet offensive. The Germans gambled everything on their ability to retreat in order. Operation Nordlicht was overtaken by events. On January 14, 1944, the Soviet offensive erupted with a massive artillery barrage. The German front, held for years, collapsed under the onslaught. The attack from the Oranienbaum bridgehead broke through, catching the Germans off guard. Von Küchler pleaded for permission to retreat, but Hitler hesitated. For 2 critical days, German forces were ordered to stand fast, fatally delaying their escape. When the retreat was finally ordered, chaos reigned. The planned withdrawal became a desperate rout. Soviet forces liberated Novgorod and cut key rail lines, trapping German divisions. The 18th Army was shattered, fleeing west under relentless Soviet pursuit. Roads clogged with wreckage. The retreat became a nightmare. Von Küchler was dismissed, replaced by Model, but the damage was done. The dream of an orderly retreat was dead. For Leningrad civilians, liberation brought overwhelming relief and joy. After 872 days of suffering, the siege was finally lifted on January 27, 1944. The city erupted in celebration, but over 1 million civilians had perished. Soviet soldiers fought with vengeance, many having lost loved ones in the siege. For German troops, the retreat was a nightmare. Years of static warfare turned into a desperate flight. The local Russian population suffered terribly as the Germans implemented scorched earth tactics, destroying villages and deporting civilians. Liberation for Leningrad meant devastation for many in the surrounding countryside. The end of the siege brought both hope and heartbreak. The human cost was staggering. The lifting of the siege on January 27, 1944, was a turning point in World War II. Leningrad, battered but unbroken, became a symbol of Soviet endurance and victory. The German Army Group North was shattered, its dream of a stable front in ruins. The Red Army's momentum carried into the Baltic states, hastening the collapse of the Eastern Front. Von Küchler was scapegoated and dismissed, while Soviet commanders were celebrated as heroes. The siege's end highlighted the failures of Hitler's leadership and the effectiveness of Soviet strategy. The legacy of Leningrad is one of resilience amid unimaginable hardship. Operation Nordlicht, never fully realized, revealed the desperation of the German war effort. The story of Leningrad's liberation is not just about a city, but a decisive shift in the war's outcome. The final chapter of the siege marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich.